Don't become a creator unless you're willing to face some harsh realities. Listen, becoming an influencer or a content creator is highly glamorized, but it's not all brand trips, free gifts, and big bucks. In this video, we're gonna break down the 5 reasons why you might actually regret becoming a creator. Welcome to Small Steps, Big Moves, the podcast about the business of influence and content creation. My name is Carmen Sognonvi, and I have been making content primarily in the luxury family travel space since 2016. And even as a small to mid-sized creator, I've been able to generate 6 figures in annual revenue every single year since 2018. So to me, the business side of this career is just as much fun as the creative side.
Hi, I'm Giovanna Gatto, and I'm a freelance video editor and content creator in the food and travel space. I primarily work with other content creators and small businesses, and I've been watching YouTube since before I could ride a bike. Now I work professionally in the space, and I've really enjoyed being able to take a peek behind the scenes and see how the business truly works. So what is the first regret?
So the first regret is you are probably going to run into cash flow issues. It's almost guaranteed. So there's definitely money to be made as a creator. And I think, one of the big misconceptions is that you become an influencer and then suddenly you're immediately rich and wealthy. And while there's a lot of money to be made, one thing that people don't realize is that the payment terms are often very unfavorable to creators. And what I mean is when you actually make that money. In the influencer marketing industry, the way things have evolved is that rather than getting paid anything up front, most brand deals, you don't get paid until 30 days after you've completed all of the work. And so that's typically referred to as net 30. Sometimes you'll even find net 60 terms, net 90-day terms, which means that you don't get paid until 60 days or 90 days after the fact. And please do not accept net 90 ever.
No.
It's terrible.
Always negotiate.
Always. Even net 60 can very often be negotiated down to net 45 if they can't do 30. Whether it's 30, 60, or 90, the common theme is that you don't see your money until much later.
Yeah, and I think that might actually stem from traditional production because that's pretty common in that space. You'll go on set or you work for a company and they have their terms already set, similar net 30, 60, 90, and you just kind of have to abide by that. But especially in the creator space, you want to make sure that you negotiate and that you keep track of when your money is coming in. Which, speaking of, do you feel like you're able to kind of predict when that money comes in aside from the net 30, 60, or 90? Like, can you be like, oh, I had a brand deal in January last year. I'll probably work with that same brand again.
Yeah, there's a lot of inconsistency in revenue throughout the year. So that's another thing that creators need to be aware of. Just because you have a stellar Q4, meaning you made tons of money in October, November, December, guess what? That's because that's when most brands blow most of their budget. Fast forward to Q1, January, February, March, you may be kind of broke. And so you need to be aware that there are these like monthly fluctuations throughout the year. So Q1 is going to be very slow and then things kind of pick up. And then Q4 is usually going to be the highest revenue months. And so very often you'll hear these, creator success stories where they're like, oh, I had 100K month, just 4 months into becoming a creator. And yeah, they probably had 100K month. I've had 100K month before, but that doesn't mean the next 2-3 months were also 100K months, right? Like that was probably December or November. And so you have to be aware of those fluctuations throughout the year. And then you also have to be aware that things change based on market conditions. So the first half of 2023, it was pretty soft when it came to brand deals. Mr. Beast's manager put out kind of a State of the Union memo talking about the market conditions and how a lot of brands and agencies weren't releasing a lot of budget in the first half of the year. So even the big guys were feeling it. And that's because of concerns about inflation and a possible recession. And so, yeah, as a creator, know that just because you have one good month doesn't mean that every month after that, you're going to be hitting those same numbers.
Yeah. And so, when creators do have those big months, I feel like sometimes you see them also spending as a result, buying cars, buying bags, things like that. So do you ever feel like, there's a bunch of pressure to keep up with the Joneses?
Yeah, I think that pressure is very real for creators. Especially creators that are in some type of lifestyle space. So, fashion, style, beauty, travel, like me. Anytime your content is aspirational, then there can be pressure to keep upping the ante, right? Well, I got a Gucci bag this month. Next month, I got to make it a Chanel bag because I saw this other creator who's also in my space just got one of those. And so I need one of those. And so you do have to be careful of lifestyle creep, which, it's natural to want nice things. And if you can truly afford it without any huge hit to your bottom line, go for it, right? That's fine. But yeah, there can be that pressure to feel like you have to keep up or maybe even outdo others in your space.
Yeah, so, a lot of those lifestyle creeps are lifestyle, cars, bags, things like that you're mentioning. But do you feel like there is a keeping up with the Joneses for business, like feeling like you need to spend a ton on your business kind of in that vein?
Yes, I have definitely seen that there's a lot of creators who maybe look at a Mr. Beast, who at this point is basically Walt Disney, right? Like he has a sprawling production studio and basically probably owns a whole town in North Carolina, I think. And there's a feeling that, I need to keep up. And so you'll see a lot of creators who, very proudly show, this is my space, this is my team. And you see like dozens of minions working for them. And certainly some business models do lend themselves to that. It may make sense on your business goals, but I think you have to be careful to ensure that it's coming from a place of true value and that you're really staying true to your goals. And also, I think a lot of creators assume that that is the natural progression, that is the natural destination of what you need to have in order to be a top tier creator. And, if you watch interviews with some of the top YouTubers, for example, you'll realize that not everyone has these huge setups, right? Like Mr. Who's the Boss, who's a big tech YouTuber in the UK. He only has two people on his team, and he's doing crazy numbers. Ryan Trahan also, I believe, only has one person on his team. So not every creator has to become a Mr. Beast with this gigantic studio, gigantic team. You can run it lean. It's really up to you what your business model is. So don't feel pressure to replicate what you see, because there's all kinds of creators doing it all kinds of different ways.
And also, I think the big thing to point out here is that there's a difference between having someone on payroll and then hiring a contractor or a freelancer on an as-needed basis. Most people in this space who work behind the scenes as editors or videographers, things like that, they work as freelancers. They work gig to gig. So you shouldn't feel like you need to put people on payroll, especially because that creates a bunch of fixed expenses, and those fixed expenses can really, affect your margins. Which, how do you feel like hiring a team affects your margins? Is that something that is, you can avoid?
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of creators run into trouble, right? The beauty of this career, as someone who's run a bricks and mortar business where I had no choice but to rent physical space and pay New York City rents to do that, the beauty of this career is that you can do it with little to no fixed expenses. You don't have to have a space. You don't have to have a team. Like you mentioned, you can hire on an as-needed basis. This podcast studio, I don't have a lease on it. We rent it when we need to shoot. People on your team, right? Like you mentioned, editors, videographers, whatever you need. These are also people that can be hired on an as-needed basis. And so the more that I think you can keep your fixed expenses as low as possible, the more you're going to be able to adapt to those slower months, right? Because you don't want to have this crazy high monthly nut that you are absolutely chained to, because then it also forces you to make decisions that maybe are not in the best interest of the long-term success of your business. And I will say, just a personal note, as a travel content creator, I saw a lot of creators in my space, because all of their revenue came specifically from being paid to travel, their revenues dropped to literally zero in 2020 during the pandemic. And so they had absolutely no income coming in. For us, because we had always had a kind of a healthy brand deal business on top of the paid travel business, we were not hit as hard. But another thing that really helped us is that we didn't have high fixed expenses. Everything was month to month, everything was flexible, everything was on a contract basis. And so I was able to very quickly pivot and be like, okay, until we see what's happening here, we need to reduce big time and get our fixed expenses to almost zero so that we can ride this out and see what's going on. And so, I think that's something that creators need to keep in mind. Just because, your revenue levels are here right now, you never know what's around the corner. And so the more that you can stay agile, the better it is.
I think another good point is that, in traditional workspace, people will hire a team and they have employees and now they're giving them benefits. And it's like that you've created a startup all of a sudden. But in production, it's not like that. And, as a freelancer, like I'm not looking for someone to offer me a full-time job. That's just not the norm. People want to work from gig to gig, on project to project, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to work with this person or this creator for many years on many different projects. You just don't have to have that obligation to try and give them a full-time role, which also helps both of you because that creator doesn't feel like they need to have all these fixed expenses, and the freelancer is able to work on other projects outside of just working with you, which usually makes them a better freelancer.
Yeah, I was just going to say, very often then you're building skills on those other projects that you can then bring back to that creator and benefit their business, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, overall with hiring a team and having, your influx of income really be inconsistent, how do you feel that your top and bottom line kind of reflect all of this?
Yeah, I think not enough creators think about the bottom line because everyone always talks about the top line. And this is not just in the creator space. This is in entrepreneurship, small business in general. Like everyone always wants to brag about the revenue, the 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures. But how much of that was left at the end of the day? Because if you made 6 figures, but then you also spent 6 figures in advertising to collect leads, and you only are left with like 40K in profit at the end of the day, you could have just worked a W-2 job to bring home 40K, right? It would have been much less work in some respects. And so, yeah, I think that creators really need to think, yes, pay attention to the top line, pay attention to the revenue that's coming in, but don't neglect keeping those expenses under control because that is really going to help with longevity.
Yeah, and I think the big thing here is that bottom line is your financial future. So it's your retirement, it's your investments, it's things like that. So you really want to save money for yourself. Otherwise, you might be 95 and still creating content, which that's fine. But, we all want to retire eventually.
Yes. By the way, if you're interested in learning more about what it takes to become a travel content creator, just like me, I have a free masterclass you can take. It's called How to Make It as a Travel Influencer, even if you're not young, hot, or rich. I was none of those things when I started this career, and so I am uniquely qualified to speak on this topic. You'll find this masterclass useful if you want to be a travel influencer, but you don't have the time or budget to travel frequently. Or you want to create travel content, but you worry that you don't have a background in photography or videography. Or if you want to grow an audience, but you don't know how to attract the right followers or how to keep them engaged because you don't have much experience yet with social media. To sign up for this free masterclass, just go to travelinfluencerclass.com. That's travelinfluencerclass.com.
Okay, so we talked about trying to keep up with the Joneses and financial instability, but what is the second regret?
The second regret is that content can take over your whole life if you're not careful.
Yeah, I've seen that Instagram account, Influencers in the Wild, and it's pretty wild. If you haven't seen it, it's really just people walking around phone to face.
Yeah, and I think that account is sort of the worst of it, right? Like of the worst case scenario of what creating content can look like. But there is also some truth and reality to it, which is that if you're not careful, everything in your life becomes content. And particularly, again, if you are in fairly, the lifestyle space. Or even I feel like if you're more of a personality-based creator, like an Emma Chamberlain or like Victoria Paris on TikTok, where your personality, your life is the content, it's very easy for you to just look at every single moment of every single day as potential content. And it's hard to be able to know when to switch it off, right? And I think this is particularly disruptive when it comes to your friends and family around you, because they may not necessarily want to be in your content. They don't necessarily want to be inconvenienced. And so I think there are certainly some creators who are not the most tactful, let's say, of their environment. And so, in the travel space, one of the genres of content that we make a lot is flight reviews. And so obviously I also watch a lot of flight reviews on YouTube to kind of see what's out there. And it always amazes me that there are some creators who will just unabashedly, loudly vlog to the camera for apparently hours on end on a flight, and oftentimes with a stranger seated right next to them. There's no attempt to crop them out of the frame, blur them out or anything like that. And to me, I'm just like, oh my God, you're being such a nuisance to everybody in this cabin. And so, I think if you're super, super into your content, you run the risk of not being tactful and not being considerate of your environment and everybody around you.
And while it's super important and you might never see an influencer in the wild, if you are one and you're out filming, you really want to be careful because people around you didn't ask to be on camera. So you just want to be conscious of your surroundings. But also in traditional production, you literally have to get release forms to allow people to just walk in the background. Every single extra, everyone walking on the street literally has to sign a paper that says, I am allowed to be on camera. So, having content potentially become your whole life. Do you ever go and travel and not film?
Yeah, this is something that we get asked a lot. And I will say, actually, before I get into that we are pretty lucky in some ways that because our niche is travel, I don't feel as much of that pressure to be filming every moment of our lives because we shoot content while we're on a trip. When we're home in New York between trips, the camera doesn't really come out. You don't really see much of our everyday lives. Occasionally if we're going to a specific event or if there's some kind of, obviously a brand sponsorship, you'll see us shooting that. But day to day, I'm not turning on the camera. And so, but a lot of people do ask, do we ever go on a true vacation where we're not shooting any type of content? It's just pure vacation. And as much as I would like to say, yes, of course, I have to be honest and admit that it can be hard to do that. And it's not because I'm so obsessed with being on camera at all times, quite the opposite. But for me personally, it really comes from really caring about our audience. And so often while we're on a trip, I'll look around and be like, oh, I feel like our audience would really love to learn about this, or this would be so useful to them, or this would be so entertaining. And so for me, it kind of comes from that. And so sometimes, even on trips that are supposed to be a family vacation, I may still sneak in a little bit of content. But I mean, one example is I recently did a sister's trip to Portugal. This is with my two younger sisters. And going in, I knew that was primarily just a vacation. However, I also knew that I did want to do a limited amount of content. So specifically, I planned on shooting a street food video. So a street food tour of Porto, Portugal. And so, we kind of went into the trip. I had let my sisters know ahead of time that I was planning to do this. So we were going to try 25 different foods. And so the eating portions of the trip we were shooting, but the rest of it we weren't. And so, I think sometimes that can be helpful as a creator, is to actually really delineate what's going to be content and what's not, and to be very specific about what you're going to shoot and then what you're not going to shoot, because then that helps prevent content from just completely taking over your life.
So you obviously make some active efforts to try and delineate everything and, not post at certain times and travel, sometimes just for yourself. But is there anything else that you do to try and not let content take over your life?
Yeah, one of the big things is we never post any content live. So whether that's travel, whether that is, just stuff we're doing locally in New York City, we don't post anything live ever. Very few exceptions. And there's a few reasons for that. One is obviously a safety security thing. We travel with our kids. So I don't think it's very safe to be like, hey guys, we're in room 1203 at this particular resort. If you want to come and snatch up my kids, this is exactly where you're going to find them. That's obviously not best practice that I would recommend. So one is just sort of a safety security issue. The second reason though, is that I've always found that posting live takes me out of the moment. Shooting and capturing content as it's happening, because I'm so used to it already, comes kind of as second nature. That doesn't really take me out of the moment. But if I'm like, okay, hold on guys, now I'm gonna post it, I'm gonna figure out the hashtags, that is something that definitely takes me out of the moment. When it comes to, creating some boundaries and not letting things take over your life. I think not posting live, if it's an option for you, is something I think every creator should try out. Now, obviously, it takes out some of the spontaneity, right? And there have been trips where we have posted more or less live, maybe like 24-hour delay. However, because our followers knew that we were at a certain destination, it created some opportunities for us to either meet up with other creators we know or meet up with some of our audience members, which were really great opportunities. So you do miss out on those kind of opportunities. You miss out on some of the spontaneity. But I also think that you gain a lot in terms of that kind of work-life balance by not posting live.
And I think I've seen more creators actually turning to that. There's a creator I follow who will do like her weekend update. She'll take the whole weekend off. If she had stuff scheduled, she did during the week. And then every Monday she'll just be like, this is what I did this weekend. And I, as a consumer, think it's really great to see, because I'm like, you got your weekend to yourself. Like it was your choice to share it. But again, you're kind of, that she was able to live those moments and she didn't have to, post in the moment like we were kind of talking about.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great balance.
So knowing all of this, do you think that you should pick your niche based on how you want to interact with your content? Is this something you should really keep in mind, especially with posting live or travel space, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something to consider. And I think that creators who start out from day one as sort of personality-based creators where their life is their content, it's hard to then break out of that box that you've kind of built for yourself, because now you've set the expectation that just about everything in your life is up for grabs, right, for your audience. And so if you are still feeling out what your boundaries are going to be around this stuff, especially if you're just starting out as a creator, I would highly recommend considering to start more niched down at first, and then kind of feel it out and see how comfortable you feel about opening up. Because I think once things are open, once you've opened that Pandora's box, it's hard to close it back down, right? However, you can start more private and then gradually open things up in a more controlled way. I think it's hard to do it the other way around.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. So you think that there is room to kind of change your niche and evolve over time, but that, if you start really big, it's kind of hard to pull back because your audience already knows all of this about you.
Yeah, I mean, I think nothing is impossible, right? But you have to know that anytime you make any type of shift in your content, you're always going to lose some audience members along the way. Because some people, it's like they were there for the old Kanye, so to speak, right? And so, that's the content that they liked. And, once you shift, then they may not be so on board with the new you. But, if you feel like things have gone too far, don't feel like it's too late. Like, pull it back. And then along the way, you're always going to pick up newer audience members who won't really know the sort of old you or your old format and will appreciate the content that you're doing right now. So it's always going to take time to make those shifts, but, anything is possible.
So having discussed, your whole life potentially being content, if we don't set up those boundaries, do you ever feel like you're on the Truman Show?
Me, not so much, just because I tend to assume that most of the people we know IRL, like in real life, don't watch our content. And for a long time, I think that was the case. Like most of our friends and family either didn't know or were not very interested. Even my own sisters have only recently started watching our YouTube videos. And I think it's because like now they're like in them more often, which is fine. Like I'm totally cool with people not being interested because they're not necessarily my target audience, right? So for me, it hasn't felt too weird, but do you ever feel that way?
I think when I started this, I just wasn't conscious like how public everything was. Obviously, I'm posting on the internet or I'm working with other creators. My content's out there, but I wasn't prepared for like going to a family gathering and some relative I met once being like, I watch your videos. And like, I love that. That's awesome. But I also am like, you know what I do for a living? Like, that's crazy. So I think the commentary or the conversation around content, especially when it is your life, was just something I wasn't ready for. I'm used to it now, but it was something was a bit of a surprise once we got out there.
By the way, if you're finding this video useful, please go ahead and hit the like button. It really does help our channel find more creators just like you. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video.
So speaking of anyone and everyone watching your content, what's the third regret?
Well, the third regret is people will have nasty things to say about you and to you. I think this happens most often when you have a piece of content that goes viral. Just to give you a specific example, in December of 2020, we took a trip to the Maldives. So there was this resort that invited us out, and this was still sort of height of the pandemic. And the bulk of this particular video was actually talking about all of the COVID safety protocols that this resort had implemented. You got to test before you get there. Once you get there, you test again. You self-isolate for 24 hours. Once you're cleared, then you can, sort of enter the rest of the resort. And this video went so crazy viral because it was at a very emotional time when people were, a lot of people were still locked down, and there were just incredibly strong feelings on either side. And this is the thing about a lot of viral content, is that a lot of the virality is driven by hate and anger. And sometimes it's directed at you, sometimes it's directed among different people in the comment section. And that's exactly what happened with this video. So we were basically getting clobbered by both sides of the spectrum. On the one hand, you had the sort of travel shamers who are like, I can't believe you're leaving your house. How can you travel to the other side of the world? You're endangering so many people. And then on the other hand, you had people who are like, oh, you're a bunch of sheep. I can't believe you're sticking these swabs up your nose. You're such a loser for even wearing a mask at all. And then these people were not only criticizing us, but then they were fighting with each other in the comment section. So it was wild. But all of that controversy, I guess, if you want to call it that, drove that video up to, I think, 17 million views. It went ridiculously viral. And so did a lot of the videos from that trip after. Now, luckily, the reactions to some of those later videos were not quite as extreme, but that was our first taste of the type of negativity that can come with virality. And that's why, I think a lot of creators want to go viral because, yes, it can lead to audience growth, though not always, especially these days on TikTok. Virality doesn't necessarily mean you actually pick up more followers. There's really a huge downside to it that I think you can't really fully appreciate until you've experienced it.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And so when you started getting all of those comments flooding in, what was it like to feel hated?
It was a lot, because it was happening at such a quick pace that literally every few seconds I would pull down to refresh the app, we'd have another 1,000 followers, but we'd also have another 100 hate comments. And that's definitely something we never experienced before. So I think the mental health toll can be really severe. And obviously after a while, we just had to walk away and just not look because it was so out of control. But yeah, I do think that, as much as creators want to chase growth, you have to understand that sometimes that may come with a very heavy mental health toll, and it's something to be aware of. So in less extreme situations, another way to handle it is also just to kind of laugh. Like occasionally we'll get a particularly ridiculous negative comment on YouTube, for example, and I'll just screenshot it and post it on my Instagram stories. And now it becomes content and everybody has a good laugh. And so sometimes, when you're in the middle of that crazy viral moment, it can be a lot, but also in the course of just regular content being produced, you'll get the occasional negative comment. And those, I think, don't hit as hard, and you can kind of use humor to kind of laugh that off.
I actually saw a comedian who got a lot of his success from social media, specifically, I believe, on TikTok. In one of his bits, because I saw him live, he was talking about a comment that he got where someone said that he had low knees. Mind you, this bit was hilarious. Like, everyone was losing. It was such a funny comment. But the real punchline was he goes, 20 people liked that comment. And now I'm like, do I have low knees? So the real point here is you just really can't control your comment section. People are going to say whatever, and you can't predict that. So what do you do, though, if you end up on the wrong side of the internet?
Yeah, so let's say you do have one of those crazy viral moments where it's just a crazy flood of negative comments, and your content is clearly being seen, put in front of an audience that is not your type of audience. The good news is there is something you can do. I know on TikTok, there have been some creators when they were in a situation like that, they proactively deleted all of the comments that were sort of, let's say, from that side of the political or whatever spectrum. They did this hundreds of times, right? Deleted every single comment that was sort of in that vein. And then eventually the algorithm sort of adjusted and stopped showing their content to that side of the internet, and then started kind of showing it to more of their usual type of audience. You can always try that. And eventually, once there's not that snowball effect, then things can kind of calm down, and then you start reaching more of a favorable audience for yourself again.
Yeah, I didn't know you could really do that. That's definitely good advice, especially if you're able to handle those comments that are coming in and maybe get off the wrong side of the internet. But what do you do just typically to monitor your comment section, or do you monitor your comment section?
Yeah, I think every creator handles comment moderation differently. For me, I do some light moderation, I would say. I know that there are some creators where any type of negative comment they will immediately delete. I don't necessarily believe in that, because sometimes, just as a content consumer, let's say I watch a video and there's something that's a bit controversial in the video, and then I go in the comment section and nobody has a problem with it. No one has brought it up. I'm like, okay, this seems like really fake when everything is positive. So I don't know. To me, if I were a brand and I was looking at a video where every single comment is positive, to me, it would seem really fake. That's just me. That's my opinion. So for me personally, there's a lot of negative comments that I'll just leave it. It's fine. Like, you're certainly allowed to disagree with me. I don't expect everyone to share my opinion on everything. Where I will delete it is if it's anything negative about my kids. That's kind of a no-go. Like, you're gone immediately. And then also, if I just get like a nasty vibe and it's just this gut feeling that I think this person is going to be back and they're just going to keep being harassing, then I will also kind of, I think YouTube has that great feature where it's hide user from channel. So the user still sees their comment, so they don't realize that nobody else can see it. It feels less harsh than blocking, let's say on Instagram or TikTok, because then it becomes, oh, look, they blocked me. And it's like some weird victory for the person. That said, I also think as a creator, you have to do what works for you. If you know that any type of negativity is going to kind of send you spiraling, then delete it, or maybe even hire someone to monitor your comments before you ever see them. So ultimately, you know your mental health the best, and you really need to do what works best for you.
Yeah, at the end of the day, just put yourself first and understand that it's something that you should be conscious about, and then be prepared for if you accidentally go viral, or just someone is hanging out in your comment section that you don't want there. Okay, so what is the fourth regret?
The fourth regret is, unfortunately, not everyone around you is going to have the best intentions. When creators blow up, especially when it happens pretty suddenly, you're suddenly going to have a lot of people sort of circling around you. And they are doing that because they see that there's money to be made from you. And, some of them will want to see you succeed genuinely, and some of them will not have a problem grabbing their piece of success at your expense. And, unfortunately, some of the dynamics can turn pretty predatory. And a lot of creators are very young, right? A lot of them are literal teenagers. They may not have ever run a business or maybe even had a job. And so sometimes, they may not be as tuned into those warning signals or those red flags as someone who has a little bit more work experience. And so, yeah, unfortunately, the predatory dynamics is something that does exist out there.
And so who do you feel like kind of targets someone like this, or kind of comes after someone who's seeing this success?
I think the first big sort of group of culprits are talent management agencies. Talent management agencies can be a great thing. If they're doing what they're supposed to, everything is on the up and up. However, there are a lot of not very professional or qualified people who are suddenly advertising themselves as talent managers and who really have absolutely no idea what they're doing. They have no experience. They don't have any Rolodex of any kind, but they're looking to glom onto a new creator and really just mine that creator's inbox for all of the incoming opportunities and build their business that way, and basically just get a a cut of everything that's already coming in. And then that is going to help them sort of market themselves to take a piece of other creators' businesses. And again, if you're actually good at negotiating deals, bringing in more business, it can be a win-win for the creator and the talent management agency. However, I will also say that, especially since the rise of TikTok, I have seen so many incredibly shady companies hitting up creators left and right. And some of these people have absolutely no idea what they're doing. And a lot of creators can get into very problematic contracts that are really hard to get out of. They lose control over their business. They're giving away way too much money. And yeah, it's just bad news.
Yeah, that's not great. Because honestly, like the talent agencies are supposed to be there to help you get more money. And so hopefully that's the case for these people, but something definitely keep in mind. Is there anyone else that you kind of see that is, has these similar bad intentions?
Unfortunately, sometimes it can come from the people working for the creator. And as much as you would hope that everybody you hire to join your team, again, is rooting for your success, right? Sometimes, I have heard some horror stories of creators who hire people and then those people kind of start pushing them in directions that they don't really want to go to. Maybe it's like a part-time assistant demanding that they get a full-time salary when really it's not a full-time kind of job. I think sometimes also creators look at celebrities and they look at the entourages that those celebrities have and that they have a whole glam squad and multiple assistants and this and that. And they feel that they have to replicate that. And then those, contractors see that potential weakness in that creator and they milk them for all they're worth, charging way more than they need to or demanding more hours than are really required. And so unfortunately, sometimes it's the team you assemble that they're actually the ones that don't have your best interests at heart.
Yeah, because if you're going to hire a team, like we were talking about earlier, like you have to give them work. You have to manage them. And so if you only feel like you have enough work for 1 or 2 projects a week, like don't bring someone on full time, especially if they're really pressuring you to do it. It's still your business and you can still keep that control.
Absolutely.
Do you feel like there is anyone else in this space? What about other creators? I don't know if I know you're a creator, so I don't know if that's saucy.
Yeah, unfortunately, predatory tendencies can exist between creators as well. And I know that you've seen this a lot in the YouTube space, right? Where, maybe there's a creator that's sort of on the rise and then more of an OG creator that feels like, oh, I want a little bit of that sauce. Yeah, I feel like I've seen that, like you were saying, some OG creators, like people who have just been on YouTube for ages. And then all of a sudden someone goes viral and they're in, a random video of theirs for just one video. But that video has a thumbnail with that person or, they're trying to do a collab or things like that. And all of those can be good. Those can be good things, but keeping in mind if this person has the right intentions. Because aside from it harming your business, it can also harm you emotionally if these people aren't necessarily really your friends or things like that. Yeah. And I think also from a business perspective, evaluating, is the benefit really fair to both sides? Or is one person getting all of the benefit and you are not getting much, if any, at all? That's a case where then it suddenly feels a little exploitative, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And just remembering that, again, like you're saying, you're a business, you have control. Like people are going to say things to you, but they're always going to be a question whether they sound like it or not. You don't have to do a collab. You don't have to be in a video if you don't want to, for sure. So speaking of vetting people, what is your 5th regret? So the 5th regret is assuming that everyone I meet in this field is a friend. Even though I am, in my heart of hearts, a cynical New Yorker who kind of like keeps people at arm's length, I do have a soft core to me. And so there have been a lot of, other creators that I've met that I've become what I thought, friends with, and where we would talk very regularly, maybe even every day. And I kind of felt like we had transcended from sort of colleague to friendship, right? And unfortunately, there have been, now I do still have, good friendships with many creators, but then there have also been some creators where I realized that, oh, I thought this was a friendship, but really to the other person, it was a transactional relationship. And once they extracted whatever they needed out of me, whether it was a brand contact, business advice, whatever it was, a collab, right? Then I never heard from them ever again. And I think that every creator probably has a story like this, to some degree. And, it's unfortunate because in this space, I guess I have sort of a collaborative mindset where I don't really think of my peers as competitors, but there are a lot of creators who do view everyone else as a competitor and who have this very, mindset of scarcity where, oh, well, if you win, that's a loss to me. When really it's like, no, the whole pie gets bigger. It's not necessarily like one person's win is another person's loss. It's not a zero-sum game, right? And so unfortunately, you often can meet someone where you think you're on the same page, but you realize later on that you're not.
Yeah, so kind of having to navigate those different personalities and different approaches to content creation, do you think it can kind of be lonely being a content creator?
Yeah, definitely. I think being a creator can be very lonely. Being an entrepreneur, period, can be lonely. I was an entrepreneur for about a decade before I even started this creator career, and I felt it even then. And, part of it comes down to not everyone really understands what you do. They may have some sense, right? Oh, you make content and you work with brands, and they have some sort of vague idea, but they don't really necessarily understand the day-to-day challenges, which is why you really want to have those good friendships with other creators, because those are the people that really get what it's like day to day.
Yeah, I just think it's important to make an active effort to really find that community so you can really have people you can rely on and can trust, especially if that's something that you feel like you really, really need. So knowing that this is not the most traditional, career, do you ever miss traditional working environments?
Yeah, I think the thing that I really missed when I became an entrepreneur is the feeling of camaraderie with coworkers, like true coworkers at jobs that I've had, where very often we were all sort of united with a common hatred of our boss. That's, I think, how the best work friendships are formed, right? But I think that's something that when you go and strike out on your own, it's very hard to replicate that exactly, because you no longer truly have coworkers. With other creators, that comes close, but in some senses, sometimes you're up for the same opportunity. So it doesn't feel exactly like the same dynamics as with a coworker at a job. And then you can also obviously assemble a team of people who are, working with you, alongside you. But even then, it's not exactly the same because you're paying them. That's not to say that they're all going to hate you or that you can't have a warm relationship with them. But I think it's hard to deny that the financial dynamics are just not all going to be exactly the same as if, you and Frank and Joe are all in the same department and you're working for this big company. It's just a different dynamic, I think.
Yeah, and I think on the flip side, for me as a freelancer, I find that the dynamic is honestly more enjoyable sometimes because I get excited when my clients reach goals or when, a video does really well or they have a business success or things like that. So I actually feel like that camaraderie is something I'm more a part of because I'm directly working with them. And I think it helps that if you do hire someone, hire someone who's excited for your work and, it's thrilled for you because they're going to be also happy when something does well and when you have those big wins.
Yeah, definitely. So basically you're saying you can really have that camaraderie if you foster it.
I think so. I think that if you're excited and your freelancer is excited, then it's a win for everyone, and you don't need to have that big corporate life in order to get that. But it's something that you have to make active efforts for sure.
Being a creator can be a really lucrative career, but it's also easy to blow it financially. And there's one huge money mistake you need to avoid. So check out this video where I show you what it is and why it could make or break your career as an influencer.